Hello and welcome back to round 5 of the 2022 Bilbao Special Event. My name is Jamie Voigt. I'm joined once again by Luke Romy, and now we are getting deeper into this tournament. We are getting some of these runs that we are saying. We are featuring 2 more 4 and 0 players, and it's going to be a great game coming out here.
This is one of my favourite points of the tournament because these players, particularly when you say they're 4-0, they're undefeated at this point. Their momentum is building and building, but at the same time, that pressure of, I don't want to get my first loss, keeps creeping in. And this is where you really kind of get the cut of the players who can go undefeated, who are going to be in those kind of top 8 positions, and the ones who are just going to fall short. And these can be the turns and the games where it's those kind of bits happen. It's a really, really critical time of the tournament.
Yeah, and of course, the earlier you win as well, the more likely you are to make it into the top cut if you do lose a game or 2 here and there. But of course, you want to be trying to get that undefeated run. And we have 2 players currently that are still undefeated at that 4-0. We are going to be featuring Oriol Plaza versus João Veloso. So that is going to be our feature match. And yeah, it's going to be a great game coming out here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what teams these players will be bringing. I was very jealous to see you and Costa had a Regieleki out there on the stream. You guys at home know it's one of my favourite Pokemon, so maybe, who knows, it could be featuring in this match. But you guys at home can interact with the stream as well and let us know who out of our 2 competitors you think will be able to take this particular set. You can vote through and we can have a little look at the screen. At the minute, it's a 50-50.
Yeah, and so we'll have to see who's going to have your support here. It's going to be 2 great players coming out for this stream. So yeah, I'm very excited to feature it. We've had some very interesting pairings coming out for all the players that we featured. We haven't just been seeing the same restricted pairing over and over again. We've had a bit of a switch up throughout the streams. We've had a few Zacian Kyogre here and there. We've had a little bit of the Rinja Sun as we featured off at the start. But last round we had 2 restricted pairings that aren't as common. They are still very strong. We have the Calyrex Ice with the Palkia and the Calyrex Shadow Kyogre as well. So I'm very interested to see if we have any other switch-ups in these teams coming out.
That's the thing, the Calyrex options can be really unique on a team. If you want to go for that kind of fast, speedy, offensive mode, you can have the Calyrex Shadow Rider. But then with Trick Room kind of emerging as a little bit more popular, having the Ice Rider is really, really nice, particularly if you can obviously hit double with the Glacial Lance. Yes. It can just be so devastating. And particularly when you get the ability rolling, the Grim Nail, the Chilling Nail, respectively. Oh, if you can't put a stop to that, it's just going to steamroll through your team.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw a little bit of that in the previous round. We'll have to see if we're going to be featuring that again. But we can have a little look at the players here. So we are going to be featuring João here coming out with the top 32 in the EUIC. A very impressive showing there, making it into that day 2, as well as getting a top 8 in the VR Granada tournament as well. So going to be hopefully a breakout tournament for this regional championships, as they are currently still 4-0. So a very strong showing at the moment. And then we can look at Oriol as well.
Yeah, take a look at Oriol's achievements in 2020 EU Players Cup top 64. So it's been able to have those kind of top finishes regarding kind of online events. And I was saying this earlier, where players who maybe are more familiar with kind of online interactions when it comes to the competitive video game, how they then kind of transition to being here in real life in this kind of atmosphere, this kind of adrenaline. And it's a big, big day. You have to make sure that you're staying hydrated, energized and focused throughout the whole day. And you're not in the comfort of your own home. You don't get those little times and areas to relax. But let's jump straight into this game. We have got leading out the Amoonguss and the Palkia. And on the opposing side for Zhao, we have got the Zacian and the Incineroar.
Yeah, very interesting leads coming out for both of these players. With the Palkia and the Amoonguss, you're probably going to be able to get up Trick Room if you want to. You do have to contend with the fake outs coming out from the Incineroar, and there could be a play rough waiting on the Zacian. But if you go for the Dynamax on the Palkia, it will be able to survive that attack and most likely pick up a KO as well. So very interesting position for both players. Do you go for the fake outs into the Amoonguss to stop any spores, but that could allow that Palkia to just go for the Dynamax and take care of your Zacian? Or do you go on the slight defensive? Do you go for the passing shots as well into the opposing Palkia? You do have to contend with this Amoonguss. Fake out would put a stop to it, at least on this turn, but you don't even need to deal with it at this point. No spores coming out, it's just going to switch out into the Incineroar. Intimidate's going to be able to put a stop to the Zacian as well.
Yeah, both cats out on the field, and I think it's nice to be able to switch in your Intimidate user. Like you've mentioned, it's really great against that Zacian, just making it neutral and then having the fake out pressure going into this next turn, particularly when there is a Dynamax happening out on the battlefield. Looks like this is for Oriol, and looks like it's going to be that Palkia.
Yeah, and it's not going to be going for any of the Trick Room setups at all. With that Intimidate as well, if Play Rough is coming out into the opposing Palkia, that won't be doing as much damage as it could have done. The Palkia should be able to shrug off any of the attacks that the Zacian want to go for here, and if it is carrying that Life Orb that we do so very commonly see, could be picking up a KO on the Zacian.
Exactly, and here comes the first fake out of the match, coming down into the opposing Incineroar, and Zash is going to follow up with a play rough here into the Palkia. Does a huge chunk of damage, not enough to take it below that 50%, but still very, very significant, weakening that Palkia. But of course, it can retaliate with a Max Geyser into the opposing Incineroar, and there's not a lot Incineroar can do to stop being KO'd by one of those devastating moves.
Yeah, and so prioritizing the Incineroar over the Zacian here, going to be able to put a stop to any of those fake outs and the parting shots that can happen. Leaving the Zacian untouched at this point, but now you've set up the Rain, so you can KO the Zacian with a Max Geyser follow-up on this turn as well. The Rain was going to be set up regardless of the Kyogre switching in, but now you have the Palkia in a pretty reasonable position because you've got the fake out active on the opposing Zacian as well as getting the Intimidate down onto it. So you can very safely go for a fake out into the opposing Zacian at this point, and Palkia can shrug off any of the attacks that the Kyogre would want to go for. Even if the Kyogre does outspeed and get an attack off first, Palkia would be able to respond with a massive hit that we've just seen. So yeah, it's still a pretty reasonable position for the opposing Palkia. I wouldn't be surprised if we see something like a Dynamax coming out from the Kyogre. That would allow something like a Max Hailstorm or a Max Lightning to be able to do some pretty reasonable damage to the opposing Palkia, or a Max Geyser just to be able to respond, just like the Palkia did in the opposing Incineroar, take care of the opposing Incineroar on Joel's side.
Exactly, and just to confirm, we've got Oriol on the right-hand side of your screen and Joao on the left-hand side of the screen there, so we know exactly who our players are and which Pokemon they are bringing. In comes a little Amoonguss side by side next to that Palkia, as we see a Dynamax happening on the opposing side of the battlefield there for Oriol. So, going to be Dynamaxing up to face down against the Dynamax Palkia with his very own Kyogre.
It's going to be able to shrug off any of the attacks that the Palkia would want to go for. Kyogre has such massive special defense that the Palkia is not going to be doing too much damage to it at this point. It's going to be able to survive through these max turns quite comfortably.
Exactly, and here comes a Max Geyser coming out from Kyogre. We've seen the Max Geysers from the Palkia, but this is really what Kyogre is well known for in this format. And even though it goes into Amoonguss, it does devastating damage due to that Life Orb as well, and the Rain Boost, and the same type of attack bonus. So much devastation from the Max Geyser. Max Wormwind's going to be the option choice here for the Palkia, just trying to reduce the attack on the opposing side. Not really going to be critical against that Kyogre, but for the Rillaboom, weakening it a little bit will make Palkia have a little bit of an easier time going forward.
Yeah, definitely will, and that would have reduced the attack of the Zacian as well, so they would have been able to survive. At least the Amoonguss would be able to take on the Behemoth Blades a lot more comfortably as well, but you can see how much damage that was doing to the Kyogre. Not too much. It's probably just about a 3-shot, but you've only got one more turn of Dynamax, so you wouldn't be able to follow up with a responding Max Wormwint into another one because you'd have to go for Spatial Rend at that point. So Kyogre's in a pretty strong position, especially with that Life Orb doing so much damage to the opposing Amoonguss. You don't even have to go for a Max Hailstorm to pick up the Amoonguss because it is in range of just a Max Geyser. You would be able to keep your Rain up and keep your Rain boosted Max Geysers going into the future turns. When the Palkia has lost its Dynamax, it's going to be a range of HP that is probably going to be in range, especially of a Life Orb Max Hailstorm coming out from the opposing Kyogre.
Very true. Well, Amoonguss is going to go for all the rage here and draw in the attacks from the opposing Kyogre. Of course, Rillaboom not going to be affected by this being Grass type, as Kyogre does go for that Max Geyser. And we saw how much it did to that poor Amoonguss previously, so this will be the end of Amoonguss in this game 1. But I think critically, it does just protect that Palkia going forward from the damage there in this turn from that opposing Kyogre. However, Palkia able to go for another Max Wormwood. Like you said, Jamie, it's the last turn of the Dynamax going down into the Rillaboom, where it can deal a significantly bigger chunk of damage against it, taking it down to about 30-35% left on that Rillaboom and reducing its attack now by another stage. So this Rillaboom is severely weakened, which I think is a good choice then to go for that U-turn. Just brings Palkia over into that 50%, but critically gets it back into its Pokeball so it can reset those drops to its attack stat.
You don't need to worry about any of the Max Wormwind drops at this point. It would have been nice to get the Wormwind drops onto the opposing Zacian, but that was left in the back. Can switch in completely freely at this point without any of those Wormwind drops. It can be intimidated still with the Incineroar still waiting in the back, but those are all 3 turns of the Palkia's Dynamax used up. So it's taken a reasonable chunk of damage, and so when it goes back to its normal form, it might be in range of the opposing Kyogre. It's definitely going to still be in range of the opposing Zacian going for the play rough. You probably need the Incineroar to come in and click the fake outs into the Zacian to be able to allow the Palkia to survive in that regard, but it would be very close if the Kyogre is strong enough to be able to KO this Palkia. It would definitely be able to KO the Incineroar if it comes in and clicks fake out into the opposing Zacian, but then do you ignore the Palkia that could potentially set up a Trick Room? So if you have the Calyrex Ice Rider waiting in the back, you almost certainly want to be clicking that Trick Room button. So it's going to be the Incineroar getting the Intimidate onto the opposing Zacian, so I wouldn't be surprised if we see the fake out go off into the opposing Zacian, and then it'll probably come down to if the Kyogre is strong enough to KO this Palkia.
Yeah, that's the thing. Kyogre's kind of got a choice of targets here at this point. It can, of course, try and get rid of that Palkia, but particularly if that Incineroar wants to go for that Fake Out, it's just going to be a sitting cat there just to take a Water-type move, and that would then bring Zhao down to only 2 remaining Pokemon. We still do not know what the 4th one is hiding in the back. If it's something like the Regieleki, that can obviously apply a lot of great pressure to that opposing Kyogre, but again, it's such a frail Pokemon, and when you look at the Orioles got Pokemon like the Rillaboom that can have that priority Grassy Glide, or the Zacian that's going to be able to take, relatively speaking, electric-type attacks, and is going to be able to fire off a Behemoth Blade, Regieleki's not going to hang around for too long. So if you're Zhao, you need to find a way to remove those big threats, to bring in the up-fourth Pokemon from the back to provide that support. But it's actually going to be the Calyrex.
Yeah, Calyrex is going to be switching, and most likely on a Kyogre max move here. It's going to be able to take a Hailstorm very comfortably, and Lightning would still hurt it quite a lot, but it's going to be able to shrug it off somewhat. So not a surprising switch out there for the Calyrex, because it's going to be able to take on this Play Rough pretty comfortably.
Yeah, it takes that really, really well. Does get the attack drop though from the Play Rough. That could be critical going forward. You know that Calyrex likes to be a physical attacker when it's in its Ice Rider form. And followed up with the Max Lightning, still going to be able to survive. And critically here, the electric terrain has been set out on the battlefield as well. Certainly Rillaboom's going to want to be able to override when it comes back into effect later on.
Yeah, it was a very, very strong double target into that Calyrex. You probably wanted to switch it up into the Calyrex so that you could parting shot out like this Incineroar is doing, so you can get the fake out pressure back onto the field to try and click fake outs and Trick Room to try and get into that position, because you probably want to be getting into the Trick Room environment so that the Calyrex and the Palkia can take on this Kyogre and the Zacian, because both of them do outspeed, and now you've taken so much damage on your Calyrex on the switch-in, so yeah, it's going to be in range of any attack that the Kyogre or the Zacian want to go for. It's going to be in range of even the Water Spout, even though the Kyogre is reduced HP at this point. It's still going to be strong enough, and the Play Rough would follow up, would KO the Palkia as well. You've got no Fake Out active on the field at this point. You'd probably have to protect and switch around into the Incineroar, and that's even if this Incineroar would be able to survive that switch-in, because if the Kyogre collects Water Spout, that's doing a huge amount of damage.
Yeah, very true. The Incineroar certainly looking to be in a bit of a precarious situation if that Water Spout does indeed come out from the opposing Kyogre. Intimidate critically going down against that opposing Zacian. As Zacian goes for a Play Rough, it's been really strong on these in this particular game, and particularly able to get that KO against the Palkia, really restricting some of the flexibility that João has to be able to switch Pokemon around on the battlefield, particularly when the Water Spout does come out. Single target, straight into that Incineroar, and now João is just down to the Calyrex.
Yeah, and that's going to be in range of any attack that Oriol will want to go for, and even if it wasn't, you've got a Rillaboom waiting in the back to be able to clean it up, so very comfortable for Oriol in that first game. So yeah, the Kyogre, there wasn't really too much to be able to deal with it, so you wanted to get into Trick Room to be able to get that Calyrex into position, maybe go for some Max Quakes. The Palkia wasn't doing too much damage to it. It was probably just about 3-shotting it with the Max Whirlwind, but then you would have to commit all 3 turns of the Palkia Dynamax into KOing that Kyogre. That's ignoring all the other Pokemon as well, so very, very strong Dynamax coming out for the Kyogre and taking this first game for Oriol.
Yeah, fantastic commanding fashion there, to be honest. Just had all the utility to be able to deal strong damage against João's Pokemon. You know, utilizing that Kyogre in such a way as well to be able to deal out powerful damage with that Max Geyser into the Amoonguss as well. You know, normally Amoonguss is a great Pokemon to throw out in front of the Kyogre because it's going to take damage really well. It can throw a few cheeky spores around, but actually those Max Geysers were devastating, and you can see the rise of Life Orb Kyogre and why it is becoming so popular.
Yeah, that Max Geyser based off the Water Spout with the Life Orb is one of the strongest moves that we have in the game. I was going to say max moves, but just moves in general.
Yes.
Maybe rivaling the Charizards going for the sun boosted moves, but yeah, it's a very strong max move, and we can see how much it did to that Amoonguss. 2-shotting the Amoonguss meant that it was very comfortably able to go for Max Geyser instead of Hailstorm. If you'd gone for the Max Hailstorm, you overwrite your own Rain and do less damage with the Water Spout. Maybe the Calyrex would have been able to survive the attacks with the Water Spout, so the Incineroar may have been able to survive without the Rain as well, because the Kyogre was just about sitting above half HP, but very crucially, just being strong enough to just keep the Rain up allowed that Kyogre to just be in a position to effectively steamroll the game.
Oh, completely. And as well, if you go for the Max Hailstorm, you might even be risking an Incineroar switching in, and, you know, Incineroar's going to be able to take that reasonably well, but catch it with a Max Geyser, it's a very different story.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'd have been chipping yourself as well, reducing your Water Spout damage even further with, like, and every little bit helps, especially when Water Spout is based off your HP. As soon as your HP starts dwindling, then it's getting less and less powerful. So, yeah, very, very nicely done for the Kyogre there. There didn't seem to be too much that was brought for the Kyogre. The Palkia can take it on and just shrug off the attacks, but then not do too much in response. Something like the Regieleki would be the best way of breaking through the Kyogre. That is absolutely the best way that João has to break through the Kyogre. If it's the physical variety, it's going to be able to take it on very comfortably, but even if it's the special one, that's still doing a lot of damage. So potentially a switch up that could happen for the Regieleki, but if you go with something like the Regieleki into the speed control that could come out from the opposing side of the field, from Oriol's side of the field, that could be a little bit more awkward, but it seems like they have heard us casters, and Regieleki has joined the field for João's side of the field.
I'm so glad you mentioned Regieleki. You gave it a little pep talk, a little boost to encourage it to come out of its Pokeball and here into the battle for João. And I think you're right, though. Regieleki is such a good counter to that Kyogre, and it was certainly difficult for João going into that game 1. So having the counter out here is certainly a good thing to kind of show that you've got an answer, and Oriol has to play a little bit more carefully with the Kyogre, which is possibly why it's hiding in the back a little bit.
Yeah, and you could just immediately Dynamax the Regieleki, and there's not too much that Oriol could do about it. The Zacian should be able to survive that attack, but if you commit to KOing the Calyrex with the Behemoth Blade at this point, then the Regieleki will most likely set up the Electric Terrain if it goes for the Dynamax, and then that would put the Zacian in range. It just needs that little bit extra with the Electric Terrain to be able to get that KO, and so it seems like that is what João is opting for.
Yeah, I'm sure it is opting to Dynamax not only the Regieleki, but in a quick ball as well. That's certainly my favorite Pokeball choice for Regieleki. Look at the color synchronization with the yellow and the blue. But aside from that, back to the match. Regieleki very happy to be here and can apply a lot of physical pressure with something like a Max Lightning at this point. We have also seen Regieleki go for things like Max Strike to get a little bit of speed control, but you're right, there's going to be a Dynamax on the opposing side, and we know it's going to be that Dynamax Incineroar. Jamie, am I dreaming? These are two of my favorite Pokemon Dynamax.
Yeah, we get something like a Max Strike coming out from the opposing Incineroar as well. Fake Out is a normal type move, and that could turn into Max Strike. Even though it's not doing the damage, that could be an option for this Incineroar. Maybe even just Dynamaxing to be able to survive the onslaught coming from this Regieleki.
Yeah, Zacian just wisely protecting in the face of this Dynamax Regieleki, which goes for the Max Lightning, so no Max Strike here, and due to the Protect, you're going to be taking just about a fifth of damage there. That would have been certainly a lot more devastating going forward, but actually is able to set up that Electric Terrain, so Regieleki will still be a formidable threat going forward, unless this Incineroar has something to say about it. Going for something like a Max Flare would be really strong, but it is indeed going to be that Max Strike, so not off the strongest move because it's only off Fake Out, but reducing the speed makes life so much easier for that Zacian on Oriol's side. Zacian can now just go for something like a Behemoth Blade into that Regieleki, which doubles in its base power as well when going into a Dynamax Pokemon. And Calyrex uses the opportunity to go, hey, everyone else is on the offensive here. How about I set up a Swords Dance and join the party? Yeah,
that's a very strong move coming out for João there. And now Oriol's in a little bit of a predicament. That was a very smart Max Strike to be able to put the Regieleki, assumably slower than the Zacian, that now can pick up the KO with the Behemoth Blade. But if you go for the Regieleki, you've got to contend with this +2 Calyrex that should be able to shrug off a max move even from the Incineroar. So do you KO the Regieleki and stop the Max Lightnings from coming out? There is going to be Electric Terrain boosted at this point, so going to be doing a lot of damage. Or do you try and put a stop to the Regieleki and allow the Calyrex to do its thing? It could just set up Trick Room at this point. And if it does that, plus one stage of increased attack, that's going to be pretty devastating, especially if you do get into that Trick Room variety and KO this Regieleki, which it looks like Oriol is opting to do.
Yeah, Behemoth Blade coming out from the Zacian, able to move first thanks to that previous Max Strike, and finds this mark onto that Regieleki, and it survives on 5 hit points. Regieleki hanging on. We know it is, I believe, holding the Life Orb though, so this will be the last move, but the Max Lightning is able to fire off into that Zacian and pick up the KO against it. So Regieleki proving not only does it have the offense, but it has the defense capabilities as well. But the Life Orb, I think it's done enough there. It deserves a little rest. Being able to survive that and remove the Zacian from play certainly is going to make things a little bit easier for João, and gives him the opportunity to bring in a Pokemon from the back. But unfortunately for the Calyrex, Max Flare is going to connect from this Incineroar. Doesn't do as much damage as I was thinking, takes it just over the 50%. I thought it was maybe going to take it a little bit closer to that kind of red zone, but it allows Calyrex to set up that Trick Room. So going forward, Giles now got this Calyrex that has boosted attack stat, can deal out a huge chunk of damage, and has a free switch into a Pokemon in the back to apply more offensive pressure to Oriol's side.
Yeah, and so it's going to be able to underspeed pretty much the entirety of Oriol's team there. A little bit of solace in the fact that there wasn't a weakness policy on that Calyrex. If that was active on that Calyrex, it would have been probably able to sweep through this game very uncontested. But now it's going to be maybe not as uncontested as it would have initially been. So the Intimidate going to be able to fire off onto this Rillaboom that has switched in, and that's probably going to keep the Calyrex out of that Grassy Glide KO range, because it's taken a reasonable chunk of damage from that Max Flare, but probably not enough to be able to be picked up by that Grassy Glide with that Intimidate hitting the field. You've got the +1 on the Calyrex as well. You could very easily go for the Glacial Lance and take care of that Rillaboom for sure. But if you go for something like a high horsepower into the opposing Incineroar, +1 is probably not enough into the Dynamax version of the Incineroar. So do you opt to try and take care of this Rillaboom, or do you want that really good damage onto the opposing Incineroar?
Well, I like the fake out into the Rillaboom, stopping it from going for fake out into the Calyrex. And Rillaboom, it looks like there was the Pokemon that Joao wanted to get rid of, going for the Glacial Lance, removes it from the fray, so it can't go for any of those priority Grassy Glides. And Calyrex get the Chilling Neigh boost as well. I believe now putting it at +2 attack here. Incineroar is going to go for the Max Flare, however, so for all the attack boosts in the world, Calyrex will be KO'd in this turn. And I think this is been quite a nice play here from Oriol, going for the Dynamax Incineroar, because ultimately there isn't really a lot that Joao can do against it at this point, particularly with the massive HP stat it's got currently. Yes, you could have gone for the high horsepower, but like you said, Jamie, I don't think it would have been enough in the Dynamax with the extra HP to pick up the KO against it. And taking a look at the last two remaining Pokemon on Joao's side, the Incineroar and the Amoonguss, those are not known for being great counters to Incineroar.
Not particularly. You can put it to sleep at least, assuming it doesn't have the safety goggles, but yeah, there's not too much offensive pressure on this opposing Incineroar anymore. It was initially Dynamax, most likely just for that Max Strike to put the Regieleki slower, but then it was still able to put out a lot of damage and take care of the entirety of the Calyrex Ice Riders. So yeah, having Incineroar and Amoonguss waiting in the back. Amoonguss is going to be very good against the opposing Kyogre at least, and we'll have to see if it has access to something like a Grass-type attack, whether that's the C-Bomb or the Giga Drain. If it is just Pollen Puff, that would still be able to do a little bit of chip to the opposing Incineroar. You really have to make use of the spores from the Amoonguss at this point to try and make it through this game, and hitting into a Protect is not a good start.
No, definitely not. In Trick Room, you know, Amoonguss is normally very dominant, but you need to be able to connect onto the opposing Pokemon. Incineroar also goes for the Taunt on Oriol's side. What a lovely tech to have on Incineroar there, to be able to just shut down those spores, and that really does make such a commanding position here for Oriol. Not only do you have the Kyogre as well that can go for those Water Spouts or Ice Beams to be able to deal good damage to either Incineroar or Amoonguss, but there's very little you can do in retaliation as well with Incineroar. You know, its most powerful move tends to be the Flare Blitz, and the Rain is up. It's going to be dealing very little damage.
Yeah, and it's not a Grass-type move coming out from the Amoonguss either. It's just a Pollen Puff. It needs to be a Grass-type move to really reduce that damage. Even with the critical hits, that was still not doing any damage. At least the Throat Chop's going to be able to do a reasonable chunk, but Kyogre survives that easily and can fire back with a really powerful Water Spout now.
Yes, and this Flare Blitz as well, even though the Rain just does a little bit of chip to that Amoonguss, weakening it in the face of a Water-type move coming out from this Kyogre, and it is indeed going to be that Water Spout boosted up by the Rain, completely takes out Incineroar. Amoonguss able to take it a little bit better than it did in the previous game, but Amoonguss just doesn't have the utility to be able to deal offensively with any of the remaining Pokemon on Oriol's side. And as lovely as it was to see the Regieleki have a little bit of moment of glory in this particular game, it really was about that Incineroar from Oriol, just being able to Dynamax it up and critically going for that Max Strike, getting the Zacian to KO against that Regieleki. Yes, Regieleki was able to survive and deal damage back, but I think the trade-off ultimately was more beneficial for Oriol.
Yeah, that Dynamax Incineroar was absolutely the play in that game too, and yeah, we see the forfeit there for Oriol taking that game, and 2-0 and moving on to 5-0 in their record as well. It probably needs to be the Palkia over the Amoonguss waiting in the back. That would have been able to take on the Incineroar and the Kyogre a lot better than the Amoonguss would have done, especially with the fact that the Amoonguss didn't have a Grass-type move. If it did, with the Grassy Terrain boost as well, that would have done a huge chunk of damage to the Kyogre and would have probably put the Incineroar out of Water Spout KO range. So then it would be able to respond back with another Throat Chop and probably pick up that KO, and then maybe you could do something against the opposing Incineroar there. But with the Amoonguss waiting in the back, it wasn't able to put on enough offensive pressure for that game. So even though the Trick Room went up, Oriol was still able to take it.
But that's the difficult thing. Sometimes when you run both modes, where you got the fast option like with the Regieleki, but then you can switch it easily to a Trick Room and then utilize the Calyrex and the Amoonguss, that can be really beneficial to have that flexibility. But just unfortunately, it seemed to just, they almost were like chalk and cheese against each other a little bit in this particular match. And Dynamax in the Regieleki, because you couldn't get the KOs that you need to do to allow your Trick Room Pokemon to have a happier time, it just made it really, really difficult for Joao to kind of come back from that. But a lovely game to be able to see some cool Pokemon featured as well.
Yeah, and it's always nice to see an unconventional Dynamax as well. So Incineroar is not usually the Pokemon of choice, but very, very impactful there. You can see how impactful those very nuanced choices can be. Even just going for Max Strike initially was just speed control. One turn of speed control, but still was being able to take on the rest of the team because there was no damage output into the opposing Incineroar tools. So yeah, very, very nice showing coming out here for Oriol, who is advancing to 5-0. So that is going to be it for us for the round 5. We'll be cutting to a very short break and we'll be back very soon. Hello and welcome back to round 5 of the Bilbao Special Event. And we are joined by the round 5 winner, Oriol, after a great 2-0 victory. So Oriol, how are you feeling after that set?
Well, I'm feeling amazing. I wasn't expecting to start this well. And well, I have to win one more, and I think I will make the cut.
Yeah, it's a very, very good start. 5-0 is exactly the position you want to be after 5 rounds, and very, very interesting games going into both of them. Switching up for the Regieleki in that game too, but able to survive that Max Lightning after you went for a very smart Dynamax on the Incineroar with the Max Strike. So tell us what you're thinking after that Regieleki was able to survive.
Well, in ladder I saw a lot of Kali Ice with Regieleki and with Helping Hand on Kali Ice. So I was expecting a Helping Hand and killing the Zacian. So I did that in order to next turn be able to kill the Regieleki, but well, it survived by a little.
Yeah.
But it was not the best, I hope, but it made me not, well, I didn't allow him to make too much damage to my team, and it was okay.
Yeah, and we can see how much damage was dealt throughout this set as well. We have the statistics for the damage that was dealt between both of the games as well, so we'll be able to have a look at those. It was a lot of damage coming out into the opposing Pokemon. The Incineroar was able to pick up the entire KO of the Calyrex as well, even though it was probably just the Max Strike initially for the Speed Control. It was still able to do some great damage with the Max Flare as well.
Yeah, well, I was expecting that, and then I was surprised with no Palkia, but that made the game easier for me because I have Town on Incineroar, so I have a safe play that was protect the Kyogre and Town the Mongoose, and the game was over.
Yeah, the taunt was very crucial as well. The Spores could have been a bit tricky into that game too, but
it was a kind of mind game.
The taunt was very strong for that game too. So yeah, but congratulations for making it into 5-0. We'll continue to follow your records and see if you continue with that momentum. And yeah, you can see the damage that was dealt across the game. The Palkia was doing most of the damage for that game 1, coming out for João, but you've got a bit of a spread between your Pokemon in that game 1. The Kyogre going for the Dynamax, of course, doing most of that damage. And then we can see in the game 2 as well, the switch up was done to the Regieleki, but then the Incineroar is not usually the Pokemon that does the most damage, but it was tied with Zacian and Kyogre, so very interesting to see those stats coming out. So that is going to be it for our round 5. Congratulations to Oriol once again, and then we will be right back with round 6 of the Bilbao Special Events.